Welcome to the Ending Sexploitation podcast, where we decode sexual harm and provide you with active solutions. I'm your host, Haley McNamara. Well, welcome back, everyone. We are so grateful to be joined today by Lisa Thompson, former Vice President of Research at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. She's a longtime advocate, an author of research reports, book chapters. She's provided expert testimony to U.S. Congress, spoken and advocated internationally. Really, she's truly a pioneer in so many ways. So hello, Lisa, and thank you so much for
Hi,
joining
Haley.
us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Always so happy to
Great to be
talk to
here.
you. And today is a really special episode because we're going to be discussing the release of a groundbreaking report called Not a Fantasy: How the Pornography Industry Exploits Image-Based Sexual Abuse in Real Life. What a title. There's a lot to dig into in the title alone, let alone the substance of the report. But maybe first we could take a couple steps back because you have had a really incredible expanse of advocacy over different forms of sexual abuse and exploitation. And I would love to hear first, I guess, just a bit about that background, your work in the anti-sexual exploitation movement, and what made you realize that we really do need to look at the connections between different forms of sexual abuse and exploitation, which is what this report does.
Well, hi, Haley. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Yes, my beginnings in this movement go back quite a ways, and it started when I was working with an organization in Washington, D.C. that was advocating for passage of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And that goes back to like the late 90s. So we're talking 1998, 1999, when there was a big push to get the TVPA passed. It was a bigger, it was like rolling a boulder up a mountain. It was a big fight. You wouldn't think it would be, but it
Mm.
was. And I got to be kind of on the ground floor to see this all this work happen, to get to see how the legislative process worked, to get to see meet some of the key activists and advocates, people who were, who in my mind are kind of legends in the field that I got to meet and kind of just learn and absorb about sex trafficking. At that point in time, it wasn't a widely discussed topic. It wasn't a term, the term sex trafficking or human trafficking. These weren't on everybody's minds. It wasn't something people talked about much. And I had not heard of it before. So I was really just, it was such a blessing, and I feel like God put me in the right place at the right time
Mhm.
to meet people who mentored me, showed me, like, just exposed me to all kinds of information and research. And so I learned about this field, and then I got really passionate about it and wanted to continue in the work. So eventually, I was able to get a job with the Salvation Army, helping them spearhead their response to the issue of sex trafficking, and was with them for about 12 years, working with them on helping to stand up programs to work with survivors across the country. And then from there, I went on to work with another, this was with a relief and development organization that had work in Africa and Asia, helping victims of sex trafficking there, providing direct services to survivors. I was kind of over shepherding those programs, so I wasn't involved in the day-to-day direct services, but definitely had to help the folks who were doing that work make sure that they could have what they needed to succeed, and make sure that we were uh, doing the absolute best we could do in terms of the provision of services, for the people that we were helping. When I was at the Salvation Army, I recall many times thinking, what's going on? What's contributing to all this
Mm.
sexual exploitation that's going on, all this exploitation of women and prostitution around the world? And really had a feeling that pornography or something, there had to be something, but it seemed to me that it must be pornography might be contributing to this phenomenon. And
Mm.
around that time, Don Hawkins and Pat Truman had been working together at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. But I was following their work, and I was so impressed and inspired by what they were doing, because they were starting to show connections between various forms of sexual abuse and exploitation, and showing that there was a connection between pornography and sex trafficking,
Mhm.
pornography and child sexual abuse, and go on and on. So I would cross paths with them from time to time in DC and be at meetings, and was like, oh, in the back of my mind, it was my dream job to come work at Nicosi. And thankfully, that's what ultimately happened. I connected with them, and the timing was right. And as you know, Haley, I think I joined like a couple months after you.
Yep.
Back, was it like 2015 or so?
Yeah,
And
I think so.
yeah, yeah.
I
So
remember in the halls them saying, "Lisa Thompson's willing to work here. We're so excited." There was much fanfare.
it was great. That was like my dream opportunity. It just happened, and so came on board with Nicosi, and was with them almost 10 years. And as you know, Haley, we've kind of ridden this together, and got the opportunity to wear different hats at Nicosi, see, along with you, see us grow and become a much bigger, stronger organization, and to see all the successes that we've had along the way. But ultimately, where I landed in the organization finally was in the research shop that we created, the Research Institute. And I have to say, that's been my favorite place. It's been the
Mm.
place where I think I'm best suited to be. And now here I am, wrapping up my time with Nicosi, and we're getting ready to push out this new report that's been this off and on project for a while now. It's
Mhm.
finally getting out the door. We're all quite relieved and excited. And here we are talking about it today. Not a fantasy. Yeah.
Yes. And with what a way to just wrap so many of these things together, because I think it's so fascinating just how you were it's like the TVPA. I mean, would you say that was in so many ways the maybe not the initial birth because the movement had to be there to bring that through, but that just opened the floodgates of awareness and advocacy, prevention work and direct services on sex trafficking. Um, and and I feel like we're approaching and in a similar moment now with the issue of image-based sexual abuse.
Yeah, it was a real watershed moment. It, as I was mentioning, sex trafficking, human trafficking, these were not concepts that the average American was familiar with. And I think that's really changed today. I think if you talk to the average person, has probably heard about these issues now, and is familiar with them. But back in the late 90s, early 2000s, after the TVPA first passed, which I think was like October of 2000, you could go to a meeting that of advocates and people working on the issue, and you would know everybody in the room. That, I mean, that would
Mm.
be it. Those would be the people, but it was
Mhm.
a very small community, and there might have been others that were working abroad who had fed in and helped you, but in general, everybody knew everybody.
Mhm.
It was just a very small group of people, but it didn't take long for it to expand. I think the issue definitely connects with a lot of people. They, I mean, it is. It's just a horrible thing to consider,
Mhm.
people being trafficked and then sexually exploited. Or, of course, there's the labor trafficking side of the issue as well, and that issue is also received more and more attention. So yeah, I think that created that was a watershed moment that put this issue on the map by getting that legislation passed. And then gradually over time, as more awareness came, more and more programs were developed to try to combat trafficking. And a lot of that energy in the beginning was focused on international trafficking, people being brought from abroad into the United States. But eventually we were able to help people understand that you don't have to bring people across an international border to traffic in them, that was
Mhm.
happening right with people born right here in the United States could be trafficked within our own country, within their own state, maybe even in their own town, with so you didn't have to have these international actors who were um, taking them over long distances. And then eventually we said, okay, well, okay, we're working with survivors, we're helping survivors, but what are we doing to actually stop the problem? And so
Mhm.
that's when we started really getting more into issues like demand. The sex buyers, the individuals who buy human beings and use them for sex, which drive and fuel the supply chain
Mhm.
of the prostitution marketplaces around the world, are all driven by these sex buyers. And then we got to looking at, okay, what's driving sex buyers? Are sex buyers born, or are they
Mm.
created? Right?
Mhm.
So as at Nkosi, we think they're created. They're created by our cultural, social environment and various things that people are exposed to, of which pornography is a huge part of that. So those were some of the ways in which the field kind of it grew. It definitely grew. It expanded, but not everybody was working on these other parts, right? So a lot of people stayed very focused on survivor services, and of course, we need to have that, but we also have to have groups like the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, which really help people see that whole web that we developed, right? The web of sexual exploitation, to show how different things are connected, that they don't that one form of sexual exploitation doesn't exist in a vacuum from another, that
Mhm.
they intersect. And one of the major overlapping or interconnecting points often is pornography.
Mhm.
And so that's where we came from. That's what we were, as a movement, how I see things progressed and unfolded over time. And then there was just much, then everybody's working on this law and that law, state laws, laws around the world.
Mhm.
So there's been a lot of legislative and work as well. Mhm.
And it's so interesting because I do see the issue of image-based sexual abuse in so many ways. What you're talking about, the connections between pornography and sex trafficking, between pornography and child sexual abuse, even kind of start feeding into this concept of image-based sexual abuse in this report. Well, actually, first, before we get into that, in this report, it's titled "Not a Fantasy." Can you just explain a little bit about why you chose that title?
Right. Well, if you're in this work for a while, particularly if you're working on the aspect of helping to understand what's fueling issues like sex trafficking or image-based sexual abuse, and you start looking at the issue of pornography, you'll hear very frequently, well, pornography is just a fantasy. It's just people's basically it's like saying that it's nothing but imaginary. It's like these,
Mhm.
I've had this idea in my head. I'm turned on by this idea. So watching people do this on the screen, that's just a fantasy that I have. It's not really real. It's not
Mhm.
really involving real people.
You always hear,
So
"It's not hurting anybody."
yeah, you hear those types of rationalizations a lot. So I I've really been interested in one of my particular interests in the movement, as in the years that I've been involved, has been around terminology, the way people talk about the issues, the language that we use, and how important it is to use to peel back euphemisms and ways that we try to gloss over the how we describe sexual abuse and exploitation.
Mhm.
And calling sexual exploitation a fantasy is certainly one of the prime examples of what the psychologist Albert Bandura would call euphemistic labeling. So I
Mhm.
was pretty excited. I didn't have a psychology background in my training when I went to college. It wasn't psychology wasn't really on my radar. But later in life, in the course of doing research for Nkosi, I ran across the very eminent Albert Bandura. Was probably they say he's like the fourth most cited psychologist in the
Wow.
world. He's like has over 1 million citations now, people
Wow.
accrediting his work. He was just phenomenal psychologist, and he did some work around the issue. Actually, he had a paper which I thought was so intriguing. It's called Selective Activation and Disengagement of Moral Control. So, what he's
Mm.
exploring is this idea that there are factors around us that or basically, he's talking about this idea that we have within ourselves what makes us act morally or not. So we have to have some sort of self-regulatory mechanisms which
Mhm.
we activate in certain circumstances to say we're going to act this way or that way. We're going to engage and we're going to act in a moral way, or we're going to not. We're going to do whatever we want.
Mhm.
So I thought, wow, I bet I could apply this idea to our field. So I did a presentation for a National Center on Sexual Exploitation summit a few years ago about sex buyers and various ways that I saw that they were engaging in disengagement. Like they were
Mhm.
using the very techniques that Bandura d- had identified. How you could see examples of those in how sex buyers think and how they act, how they rationalize their sex buying behavior. So then I got to thinking about this in the pornography issue, and in particular, image based sexual abuse. And it occurred to me that, oh, wow, yeah, this whole fantasy idea, that's what Bandura would call a euphemistic label. It's a label that we're applying to a behavior so that we can think of it in a way. It's shielding us from the truth of what that behavior
Mm.
really
Mhm.
is. It's allowing
Mhm.
us to put this veneer on it, make it look all, put dust, pink and sprinkles and fantasy, make it look all fun and good, when really it's anything but. It's dark, it's bad, it's harmful. But using this labeling, it allows us to disengage
Yeah.
uh, our moral opposition to participating in either using pornography or in actually creating and disseminating image based sexual
Mhm.
abuse material. So it's interesting because just recently I heard a podcast with a high ranking person at ALO, the company that now runs Pornhub. And she
Mhm.
was speaking the euphemistic label stuff. I mean, it was just, oh,
Wow.
yeah, pornography is a fantasy and so forth. So it was kind of, I mean, it's sad, but it was
Yeah.
also reassured me that, yeah, I'm on the right track.
Yes. That it's and it makes sense too, from since we're talking about what's a commercialized industry, and in this report, when you're talking about the pornography industry, you're talking about the industry, like the corporations that are producing, disseminating, they're structured for this. So you're not talking about it Instagram, you're talking about Pornhub, X videos, X hamster, and the like.
Yeah,
And
it
it
mm,
and because they're a commercialized industry, feel free to expand on that, but I would just say because they're, a commercialized industry, it makes sense that they would engage in euphemistic labeling, which I love that phrase, because it's literally marketing. They're trying to market it as a
right.
palatable product for people to engage with, and then the consumers internalize that labeling.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting, yeah, about the pornography industry. It's it wa we this was a challenging report. We had to figure out, okay, we wanted to write about IBSA. We wanted to get into this topic, image-based sexual abuse, but what would be Nicosi's way of doing so? Because there's already
Mhm.
a lot of scholarship, wonderful scholarship out there on the issue. But then we were like, okay, well, our issues are we are always one of our core issues is the issue of pornography and showing how it contributes to various harms of various other forms of sexual abuse. So let's do that with IPSA.
Mhm.
And it made perfect sense. But the issue then is, well, what do we focus on? Because really the the pornography industry is so vast. It's huge. There's many different companies, people that play a part in the industry. So trying to narrow it in on what it was going to focus on, which aspect of the industry. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it wasn't, I guess really for us, the challenge was we did end up focusing on the distributors, the folks who have these big distribution platforms that follow the YouTube type aggregator model to
Mhm.
disseminate pornography. So the tube site pornography platforms. But because of Nicosi's work with other corporate entities that fuel sexual abuse and exploitation. We know how much entities like Instagram or Discord or other
Mhm.
Twitter, right, or now X, how they also host and disseminate pornography and fuel the problem. But we thought for the purposes of this report that we would keep the focus, we would really try to keep it much more constricted to the core industry the core distributors. Those are that's who this report is really about. So we're talking about, of course, Pornhub. We're talking about X videos, XNXX, X hamster, the four big ones that
Mhm.
unfortunately most of us have heard of now.
Mhm. And similarly, another challenge, and then I'd love for us to dive into some segments of the report too, but was what is image-based sexual abuse as well, right? Because
Uh,
almost similarly to what you're saying at the beginning of the anti-trafficking movement, there was a question, well, what even is sex trafficking? Is that even a term? Are we going to use that? Right now, too, there are a few different terms that get said for this idea of image-based sexual abuse. Some are more narrow, some are more broad. If you could speak about IBSA,
right.
why we chose that, why we didn't choose
So,
other
whew,
phrases.
yeah, we
Big
maybe
topic.
yeah, we did a whole document on this that just dealing with the terminology, and really that was something we had to do before we can even write this report. We had to get, what are we talking about? What are our
Mhm.
terms? And how are we going to use them? So we issued this document back in 2020, fall last year, image-based sexual abuse classifications and definitions, where we did a deep dive, and this took months of work. It wasn't something that we worked on every single day, but it was this back and forth collaboration between members of the team weighing in, and we'd think we'd get it about done, and then something else would come up, or we'd say, and then
Mhm.
you'd set it aside for a month or two, and then you're like, oh wait, that's not right. And I'm kind of glad it took that time, because time allows things to percolate. Your
Mhm.
ideas crystallize, your understanding becomes, you get a clearer picture of something. So it did take us quite a while, but we got that document produced. And maybe we could pull that back up again. So we did come up with a definition of IBSA. As you can see here, we say that it encompasses a wide range of abusive activities, that they include the creation and the manipulation, or possibly the theft or extortion, the threatened or actual distribution, or any use of images for sexual purposes without the meaningful consent of the person who's depicted, and it's for a purpose, purposes of sexually exploiting them in some way. So it can also include sexual violence or harassment that is committed towards a person's representation. So an image of you that exists in a cyber reality, like an avatar. So, or
Mm.
in online gaming, because we're hearing about people being actually sexually assaulted in these online settings where you have an avatar, where you have a representation that is you, and
Mhm.
somebody can sexually assault you in these games. So we wanted to make sure it was big enough to our definition incorporated that. But what we've really tried to do, both in that document that you're looking at right now, as well as in the Not a Fantasy report, is make sure we're not conflating image-based sexual abuse with the child sexual abuse
Mhm.
material, which can get a little, but if we have to try to just keep a bright line between them. That, because a lot of children we know will now self-generate, self-create sexually explicit material and share it with somebody that they are interested in romantically. And then it might get shared with other kids at the school. But if that individual who's created that material is under the age of 18, it's very likely that it could be classified as child sexual abuse material.
Mhm.
So we're trying to keep that line of demarcation very bright. And so the IBSA reports, we're really focusing on those who are over 18.
Mhm. And that's important because the child sexual abuse material, or child pornography, as it's some in some laws, is an established crime. It's a crime to host it. It is not protected by the First Amendment in any case. It has just a very strong legal precedent, so we don't want to unintentionally water down the
Mhm.
law, how it could be used with child sexual abuse material. Although it can get confusing, it's really important and I think helpful to clarify that IBSA, we're talking about adults because, like you said, so often the, I guess, pattern of the abusive imagery can be mirrored. It's very similar in
Yes.
child sexual abuse as to what an adult might experience. It's just that the legal repercussions are different.
Right, because what has happened is we've had this transition from an age where it was always an adult who was luring children, in some way manipulating them so that they could get images of them, sexual images of them. But now we've actually turned our society upside down, and it's a society in which children are now their own pornographers. So this is
Mhm.
what is confusing, that we actually have children who will self create pornographic, sexually explicit material and share it with others. And so that gives it this sheen that, oh, this is something that they're consenting to or that they're doing. But
Mhm.
even if that's the case, it's still illegal material. It's not, it doesn't hinge on their consent of whether or not the material is illegal or not. They
Mhm.
are underage. This kind of, they, we would, I hate that we're in an age in which pornography's been so normalized and children been so exposed to it that they actually think that this is something that they should and can engage in with
Mhm.
themselves, with their peers, or with somebody they meet online. But we know that children are not at a developmental age where they can understand the consequences of these things and what they're doing. And that's why we have these laws, to protect them, because they are at an age where they can be developmentally preyed upon on
Mhm.
their lack of understanding about long-term consequences and what things really mean when you share pictures of sexual images of yourself, right? Like, kids don't understand the long-term consequences of these things,
Yeah.
and they're very easy to prey upon. Adults can easily manipulate children and play upon their
Mhm.
fears, and that's what we see with this massive sextortion issue that's going on with minors. So that's, I think, where the confusion comes from, is because now we live in an age in which children are their own pornographers.
Mhm.
It's tragic. I mean, I don't say that in a blaming way. I wanna be clear, I'm not blaming children. I think it's on completely on society, in the world
Mhm.
that we've created, that this has happened. But this is just the truth of where things have landed, and how it plays out is that children are now their own pornographers. So,
Yeah.
but when getting back to IBSA and image-based sexual abuse, the way to just keep these two things straight is to, we're talking about children under 18. That material is illegal material, and I mean, generally speaking, I mean, we're not prosecutors. We're not the ones bringing the cases about these images, but generally speaking, most of that content could probably be prosecuted even if it's generated by the child themselves.
Mhm.
So, but when we're talking about image-based sexual abuse, we're talking about those who are 18 or over, and sometimes the circumstances are the same, where somebody has been encouraged or decided that they would send a sexually explicit image of themselves to somebody, and then but that image gets distributed well beyond whoever they sent it to. They intended
Mhm.
it to be part of a personal private relationship, but that recipient distributes it to other friends, to their colleague, puts it on a social media site, or puts it on a pornography platform. And that's kind of where we're going to be going with Thought of Fantasy, is really talking about more about how the issue of image-based sexual abuse was fueled by the pornography industry and the model that they have been operating under for decades now, about the free pornography model, and how IBSA, this content that people would share with a partner, that individual, once they have it, they can do with it what they will. And for many of them, it was uploading it to pornography sites.
Mhm.
So now pornography sites get this free source of new content from their users, these anonymous third-party users who would upload material that they got from their girlfriend, or from their buddies who got it from their girlfriends, or maybe they stole somebody's phone or something like that, and they upload it to pornography sites.
Yeah, and this leads so well into discussing some of the key analyses in the report. We won't have time to go through all of them, but that's why people will have to go to notafantasy.org in order to download and read the full report. But in this report, you cover 9 ways that the pornography industry facilitates image-based sexual abuse. And we can even start with what we were just discussing, that one of anonymous user uploads, and really that lack of robust content moderation that
Right. So if we go to page 18, we can, page 18 in the report will have a nice summary of those ways. There we go. Yeah.
oh, great.
So we did come up with 9 ways that the pornography industry, and by that the tube site platforms, have contributed to fueling image-based sexual abuse. And I would say a very preeminent reason is because they have sexually socialized their users to
Mm,
image-based sexual material, because the very fact that they were wanting free content, they allowed anonymous third parties to upload material. And of course, now you've got all these people who've been sharing sexual explicit images on their phones. So guys have probably a library of this kind of
mhm,
material that they've gotten from people, a lot of girls, young women, and I should say young women. They upload this stuff to sites like Pornhub or X videos. And now other people who go to these sites, who are visiting these sites, are seeing the material that is clearly, in some cases, very
mhm,
obviously not something that somebody has consented to putting this up on their website. Like, it'd be very obvious, like the girl is drunk, right?
mhm,
So much like that's a very typical scenario where there'd be a party going on, people film a girl who's drunk being sexually assaulted, sexually violated, and then that content is uploaded to a porn site. Um, or even, guys who've got their girlfriend drunk or passed out, uploading that material to these websites. So
mhm.
that's another example of how it's been very clear that this is not a consensual image, but it's on this website. Literally millions and billions of people are going to these sites. So you see this, people coming to these platforms are using these platforms for sexual gratification. They're not just coming to
Mhm.
just look like they're looking at a catalog. They're coming
Right.
for sexual gratification. So they're going to gratify themselves to this type of material that they see, and that becomes normal.
It's fascinating how the fact that these pornography companies allow these in so many cases allow these unregulated uploads from just about anyone means that there's real image-based sexual abuse on those platforms, which then normalizes it to the user and then can create more demand. Like it can almost I just think that the term sexual socialization is so interesting because it's almost in some ways by feeding the idea of a certain kink, for example, spy cams, hidden camera
Mhm.
scenarios, upskirting scenarios. Yeah, like a woman being drunk, a woman being drugged. Oh, this is my real. So, I mean, sometimes the titles, even themselves, are
Right.
something akin to my wife, doesn't know I'm recording her, come and watch. And by even just hosting that, it can instill and build the demand for more of that material in a way.
Exactly. You put that so well. There's a quote from Jennifer Johnson, who's a professor. She's at Virginia Tech now, but she's done some research related to the pornography industry, and she says that the industry doesn't merely respond to consumer demand; it actively crafts it.
Wow.
So it's it's absolutely shaping the demand, because you get these ideas that, and if enough of them are out there, if there's enough of this content, and you've got this many, literally like 290 million unique users a month on Pornhub, 290 million unique users a
Wow.
month. That's just one platform. You've got X videos, you've got NXX, you've got X Hamster, and then a plethora of other pornography sites out there. So and there are pornography websites, which are just devoted to this kind of material. They're
Mhm.
not the main distributors that everybody goes to, but if you really get into this, you could just go to those types of websites. So, here's a chart that we came up with. We wanted to document, as I was mentioning earlier, a lot of the discussion about IBSA focuses on the individuals who create the material and distribute it, those single actors. But what
Mhm.
was so important about this report is that we're drawing back the curtain on how it isn't just about these individual actors, but there's a business, corporations that are driving this and profiting from it. They profit from it, they fuel it. It's like this
Yes.
self-fulfilling spiraling that it just the monster just gets bigger and bigger.
And it's fascinating too, because I think that quote really stands out to me. That concept of that the pornography industry is fueling like sexual memes almost as well. And um, I think we can see that, and we aren't surprised by that in advertising and the way the algorithms work on social media. I think that it can build like, oh, you see a yellow umbrella, you're thinking about yellow umbrellas. Oh, maybe I want to buy a yellow umbrella, and suddenly you're buying yellow rain boots too. I don't know how what the exact analogy would be, but like that kind of like idea seeding and building demand for things that happens in pretty much every commercial industry. But for some reason, because it's around sexuality, people think that their desires are only coming from themselves and not recognizing that there can be influences by like algorithms the same way
Oh,
that
yeah.
algorithms can influence anything.
This is such a huge this is where I think that the porn industry is particularly nefarious. There's this myth, right, that you're getting on a porn site and that you're exploring your sexuality, when in fact, the
Mm,
porn site is shaping your sexuality. It's just the inverse. You're not exploring it, they're creating it. They're
mhm.
funneling you, through algorithms down a particular pipeline, and they're just gonna take you deeper and deeper into that particular area. That's not you exploring, that's them taking you on a journey. It's so technologically crafted and engineered. I mean, they're basically technologically engineering people's sexual appetites. For instance, national origin is a big
Mm,
theme in pornography. So what okay, is the person Russian? Are they Asian or maybe not just national origin, but like ethnic,
mhm.
the person's ethnicity. So there's tons of searches that go on around those types of themes. And if you look at, one Russian woman, then you're going to probably be served up a lot more because that's how the algorithms work. They think that's your interest. And so they're going to feed you more of that because you found that particular video interesting.
Mhm.
Well, it's the same thing with image based sexual abuse material. Oh, did you like that voyeurism video that was shot in a gynecologist's office?
Mm.
We can get you more of that.
Yeah.
Did you like that voyeuristic video that was in a dressing room? Great, we got more where that came from. So the the algorithms feed more and then thus help create the very appetite for the material that the abuse material that they're serving.
It's wild, and I think this is an aspect, that the report talks about really well and that people don't think about because it's hard for people to think, I think, sometimes about the pornography industry as an industry. The fact that they have algorithms, there's almost this idea that they are like a goodwill nonprofit because it seems free to people because they're going on and they're saying, well, I'm not being commercialized. It's all free. And in this report, you do talk about how this freemium model actually is one of the methods that the pornography industry uses to facilitate image-based sexual
This
abuse.
was
Could you
part
talk
of
a
their
bit about that?
evil yeah, part of their evil genius was the whole freemium profit model that was devised. Um, and the idea was that if you had free pornography, you could entice more people to come to a pornography site because they could see something for free, not have to pay, and to go on and it worked brilliantly. You get lots of eyeballs coming to your site because you've got free content. But anybody who's familiar with pornography knows that's going to get boring. what you're seeing is going to get boring, or maybe you're not going to see enough. You want to see the next thing that's in this video. So to see that next, the whole video, you've got to pay. Now,
Mhm.
not everybody's going to do that, but even if a small percent, when you've got millions of people coming to your site, or billions coming to your site, if only a fraction of those turn into paying customers, then you're going to be making boatloads of money. So that's
Mhm.
that's the freemium profit model. You entice people with free content, and then the idea is that some of those flip into paying consumers. So they pay for either to see an extended video, to see what's called premium videos, or maybe it's for products. Like they so these porn sites have advertisements for various products that you can buy, some of which are so disgusting I won't even describe them. But like products that you can buy. So there's advertising. There's also like you could migrate them into what's the camming, so the live sex shows that you can pay
Mm.
for access to. So this is part of the idea that you, as we got highlighted here on the screen, that you're going to attract the customers, and then you're going to convert a certain percentage of them into paying people, and that's how you're going to make the bulk of your money.
And that they're incentivized to get as much content for as little cost as possible on their free version, which incentivizes them, one would think, to have lax content moderation about if, well, are those people consenting? Are those people knowledgeable? In this report, you talk about the fact that there really is no robust age and consent verification across the industry, for most of those who are showing up and in these videos. And you also talk about in this report, the failure to protect performers from pirating content, that very often these pornography platforms either themselves are pirating content from performers or are just allowing it without any repercussions. Could you speak to that as well?
This was a huge part of the problem, that they needed with the freemium model. You have to have content. So where's all this free content going to come from? Do pornography performers want to make their content available for free? Of course not. So this was the problem that the model had. So you either had to pirate. So what they did, they pirated copious amounts of the material, especially in the early days on the tube sites, was pirated. And then you empower these anonymous third parties to upload everything that they have. Share
Mhm.
all that stuff you got, guys out there. This will be a great, just fun fest for all the guys out there who've got this stuff on their phones to share it with the world. And isn't it all a great big joke? That's how it was handled. Really, just as truly as a joke. And the women whose material is getting uploaded, they're being completely just devastated by the fact that their
Mhm.
content is up there, and that now people know about it, and they get harassed and they get doxxed and all these horrible things are happening. Meanwhile, the pornography industry keeps it up there. And that's another one of the harms that we identify, is that we are by no means fans of pornography industry, right? But we don't want anybody who's in this industry to get hurt more than they already are. I mean, we see it as
Mhm.
a highly exploitive industry to begin with, but then on top of the women we would assert being exploited in the production of pornography, period. But to have
Mhm.
that content stolen from
Mhm.
them, which is their means of livelihood, like that's outrageous. So yeah, the pirating
Yeah.
is another form of IBSA, because it's not,
Yes.
when material is taken from a performer and distributed without her consent on another platform for which she's often, typically not getting remunerated, then of course it's IBSA. She didn't
Mhm.
consent to that.
Yeah, she didn't
So
consent to it.
so that's another thing that we bring up in the report.
Yeah, and so often it can really harm if a performer wants to exit the industry, and people do weaponize that intentionally to send it around to try to harm performers sometimes who are trying to leave the industry. by weaponizing their images against them. So that's absolutely something that we view is a form of IBSA and is a form of exploitation. Are there any of these 9 ways that the pornography industry facilitates image-based sexual abuse? Are there any others that you want to make sure we have time to highlight today?
Well, I think we've talked about the big ones, the sexual socialization, the freemium profit model. I think obviously I think the next biggest thing is AI and
Mm,
how AI generated material is the definition of IBSA. Because
yeah.
if yeah, the people are having images of themselves where they're fully clothed, doing normal activities, and having that morphed into pornography that is then shared and distributed, and the whole cycle repeats itself. It is the quintessential definition of IBSA. And what this is doing, though, I think is it's completely obliterating the idea of any personal autonomy over
Mhm,
participation in the sex industry, over
mhm,
participation in pornography. Because obviously, in this world, there have been many people who've decided this was not the path they wanted to go in their life, that they did not want to be in pornography. But now anybody's image can be taken off a website, a social media platform, a old photo album that you might
yeah,
have, and turned into pornography. It can be distributed, commodified, and so never mind the fact that you never agreed to participate in the sex industry. Now you've been turned into pornography, and
mhm,
there's no way you can stop it. How do you stop that? A rogue person out there, any person who has this technology and has the desire to turn images of people into porn. So the whole idea of consent is just being blown to bits because of AI generated material. It's there's no meaningful right to it anymore. AI is
mhm,
destroying it. I
mhm.
mean, maybe not AI, so the people who use it, who use AI, are destroying it. And but even AI
But then these
itself,
platforms are turning a blind eye to it
the
as
platforms
well.
can have,
Mhm,
certainly have, and they may still be. I mean, there are platforms that are just, or not platforms, but there are websites that are just generated to um,
mhm,
that kind of material, to creating computer generated pornography of computer generated forged pornography. There are websites that are just devoted to that, and that material can find its way onto the bigger platforms, and they have a disincentive to get rid of it, right? Because that's going to
mhm,
bring eyeballs again. If so and so who's never been in pornography and who's some big celebrity, and now you can see them nude, right? Or maybe
mhm.
even doing a sex scene, yeah, that's going to draw eyeballs to the site. So there's not a lot of motivation there to keep this kind of stuff off their sites.
Yeah. It's I'm so glad that you, brought that point in because I do think it's just so important to be recognizing that the technology landscape is rapidly changing with AI. We've been talking about that a lot on the last couple episodes of the podcast, and but not this angle of how that can surface on pornography websites themselves. They can profit from it, and disseminate it to hundreds of millions of people, which is incredibly concerning. Yeah.
Yeah, so the websites, I mean, I don't wanna paint them all with the same brush. I will, as hard for as it is for me to say, ALO/Pornhub, they are moving gradually in the right direction. But right, let's all admit that this has been like, you know, trying to herd bulls, right? Like
Mhm,
these are not Pornhub is not an entity that wants to be regulated. It's not, it's taken years of our advocacy by people like Lila Milkowait and Exodus Cry and so many others in the movement, literally years of
mhm,
crying out about what's been absolute, CSAM material, blatant IBSA material on Pornhub. It's no secret. And now they want to act like, oh, we should just all trust them and think it's all good on their
mhm,
site. I mean, I will give them credit. They have made changes. But does that mean that they are reputable? Does this mean we should trust them? Does this mean everything on Pornhub is wonderful? No. Am I going to just take their word for it that now everything's hunky dory? Absolutely not. They have a horrible reputation. It will take, and honestly, never trust a pornographer. You can't trust them.
Mhm.
They're in a business that profits off sexual exploitation, and you cannot trust anybody that is pulling the levers of power on how this stuff is just distributed. It's all about them and their money making. It's not about the performers. It's not about the people whose material gets up there on the abuse that they experience. They only have one priority, and that's
Mm.
their pocketbook.
That's been shown out in the evidence in not only actual research, but also just, as you said, court cases, survivor stories. We've seen the results of what this industry is producing, and so it's not a theoretical argument, it's not a fantasy. We're seeing the real world results. To end on a positive, I'm really happy this document does end with some policy recommendations. Are there any of those that you would like to highlight? I think it's good for people to know that we are trying to not only bring people down by uh, whistleblowing on the harms, but we are also trying to chart a path forward for what could change.
Well, I think the big thing I would point out is, for instance, with Pornhub, they are crowing about the fact that, oh, they're doing age estimation for the images, the material that's uploaded to their website. And while I know that that technology is really great and is very accurate, generally speaking, it's not the same as age verification. Okay, age verification is you are verifying the age of the individual in the image, and that is the responsibility. That's where the bar needs
Mhm.
to be set, not estimation, not with a porn site. I mean, other
Mm,
companies where
mhm,
there's not this high probability of abuse going on, that's one thing. It's not the same for the ALOs of the world and the X videos of the world. Like, they have to be held to a much higher bar. And so we must insist on age verification. And so
mhm.
that's um, a fine point of distinction maybe for some people. But if you get into this, if you look, they are not the same thing. Age estimation and age verification are two different um, things. And in the higher bar is age verification. And
Mm.
that's where what we need to require of the porn industry for any uploads of content to their sites.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I think that's really helpful. That's a really helpful clarification for people who aren't aware. And for those who haven't already heard, the Take It Down Act on IBSA did just recently pass the House and Senate, which we're very excited about. That will mandate that online platforms remove reported IBSA within 48 hours, very similar to copyright law. Some tenets of what were in the Take It Down Act are what this report has recommended as well. Well, Lisa, I really appreciate you staying with us to conclude this incredible project. Do you have any parting thoughts?
Well, just I think that that the unique contributions of this report are, one is that we're broadening the perspective of who is responsible from individual actors to an industry that has actually fueled and profited from the
Mm,
existence of image-based sexual abuse material. I think that's highly important. I think another aspect about the report that is helpful is we've tried to pull together information about the four big platforms, not just focusing on Pornhub. Pornhub has sort of had a bullseye on its back or on its forehead, whatever, because of the way that they were so right, trying to be cute and flippant and funny all the time with their marketing ploys and so forth. So they put themselves out there to be the center of attention, whereas X videos has intentionally stayed in the shadows and tried not to draw attention to itself.
mm,
So I understand why Pornhub has been the center of attention, but part of what that we're trying to do with this report is help the movement to understand that we can't keep our focus only on ALO and Pornhub. We have to talk more broadly about the other distributors, the other mainstream platforms that are where billions of people are going to every year to
Mhm.
consume IBSA content. So we
Mhm.
have to do more to create pressure on them. Cleaning up one isn't going to do the job. We have to get this whole industry is founded on abuse.
Mhm.
Right, that's how it's been operating for decades now. The entire industry, from piracy to IBSA material to child sexual abuse material being on these platforms, that's been the business model for decades, for over a decade. So it's time to clean house. It's time to hold all these actors responsible and to really shine a light on all of them. So that was one other aspect of the report we were really
Mhm.
trying to do is show that it's not just about Pornhub. Pornography is really part and parcel of the problem with IBSA because consuming pornography is going to socialize you to think IBSA is okay.
Mhm.
So,
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for this incredible report. I just really encourage everyone who's listening or watching us on YouTube to go to notafantasy.org where you can download the full report. We also have a web page and sexualexploitation.org/IBSA, IBSA, which is generally about the issue of image-based sexual abuse. Links to both of these will be in the description wherever you're listening or watching this. I just encourage you all to share this episode with a friend. Thank you all so much for listening and joining us in Ending Sexploitation.